Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's mindset coach. If you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss another podcast, and drop us a lovely review. And as well, with your help, we'll be able to reach more women around the world. So I'm super excited about today's podcast because I'm sitting down with Ashleigh Boehm. For those who don't know Ash, she is a health and nutrition coach, a certified eating psychology practitioner, and a master NLP coach. She is a woman who's experienced a lot of pain, a lot of joy, and a lot of growth. And she's very passionate about helping other women cultivate deep levels self-intimacy and embodiment. And if you're here for growth, this is the channel for you, because today we're going to be talking all things self-worth, embodiment work, chatting about Ash's journey around dieting, external focuses, validation, and the hard truths about growth and healing that most people don't talk about. Ash, thank you so much for joining me again. For those who haven't listened to my conversation with Ash, which was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, it would have been about 2 years ago. I remember I was in Byron, in my bedroom.
Oh my God, yes, I remember that. Wow. So for those who don't know Ash, I would highly recommend listening to the first episode that we spoke about 2 years ago, because that was the first glimpse of you getting into the embodiment practices.
Yeah. Yes, it was. Wow. Definitely. So I was going through like a massive, big life transformation at that time. I think there was so much going on. I can't remember what month it was, but I remember I went through, I think, around 2 breakups that year, and also an explant surgery, and there was so much going on. So yeah, I was really confronted with a heap of big emotions, which I had to learn how to do something with. And so yeah, that was a big piece in my embodiment, and coming home to my body and learning how to feel safe within my own body through those like huge pivots. And yeah, I'm just reflecting upon it now. I can't believe how long ago that was, but yeah, how big that was for me. Yeah, interesting.
So much has changed. And I want us to start talking about where you're at right now with your practices of embodiment, because as you said, during that time you were going through quite a fair bit, and you were trying to, work more with your body, less with the mind, and most people do it the complete opposite.
Yeah, well, that's kind of like where I had found myself, is my body had been the central focus of my life for my entire life. And then as soon as I got into NLP and started learning about the mind, and especially spirituality as well, I kind of like abandoned the body, left it behind, and went very much into the mental and the spiritual realms. And then, yeah, being confronted with some big life-changing events, and also like, a lot of things that I was going through in regards to my own body and how I was experiencing my body, it really made me realize how important it is to have a very strong connection there with, mind, spirit, and body. Like, I think too often we separate them, but essentially we are all just one being, one whole being. And I think that was one thing that a misconception that I took on when I was healing with my body image stuff and through my eating disorder recovery, was this idea that I'm not my body, I'm not my body, I'm not my body, and this separation between it not being me. And even though the intention of that was to devalue how it looks and start creating more value around who I am as a human being and as a person, that was like the positive intention of taking on that belief. What it did was it put my body underneath the rest of me. So my mind and my spirituality and all these other things became more important, and my body was less than. So then I guess the journey since that was about creating that cohesion and realizing I am a body. You are a body. We are all bodies. Like, we are not just our body, but we are a body. And without a body, we wouldn't exist. I wouldn't recognize you. We wouldn't have emotions. I wouldn't be here. So it was kind of like this big separation, or this, it was like went from a path of like obsession and being just my body to being more than my body, to being, no, I am my body. It is me it's all one part of the same whole, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like, I feel like that's the way that we learn as human beings anyways, like one extreme to the other, and then realizing that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle, but we have to experience what it's like to know what we aren't to know what we are, if that makes sense.
Well, it definitely makes sense to me because
Yeah.
I feel as if we've kind of come from like the same background of being obsessively with sports, into fitness, bodybuilding, powerlifting, CrossFit, and so forth. And then over the years, we've kind of transitioned, as you mentioned, towards the mindset, spirituality, but not really healing or growing towards the body issues that we had.
Yes. Yeah. And they're both kind of like symptomatic of the same thing, right? Self-objectification or like separation. So in those big kind of moments that I was talking about previously, that really woke me up to the degree that I needed to like look at what this whole embodiment thing means. Like, what the fuck does that mean anyway? I was in Byron at the time, so there was a lot of like talk about it, but I didn't really understand it. And yeah, embodiment is about living life through the body. And that means for me it was very much around learning how to be with emotions in a very big way. And so all the obsession around how my body looks was because I had no ability to hold uncomfortable emotions in my body. Like, that is how I self-objectified, and that's how I got affirmation and praise, and there was a certain separation from my body as being an object that I got to use. And then, abandoning it and leaving it behind and going into the mindset space, again, objectification, separation. So it was like the healing of that was learning how to live in my body and be a body. And a huge component of that was the emotional aspect, because that's the biggest reason why we leave our bodies behind, is because it's very difficult to be in one a lot of the time, and all the uncomfortable feelings of being in a body. So sometimes using it or separating ourselves from it and using it as an object to get what we want is a way to create a certain separation and disassociation, because being in it as opposed to it being something that we can separate from can be really fucking painful. And that's a big reason why a lot of us want to escape that, is because it's hard, it's difficult. Yeah,
I can totally relate to that. And as you mentioned, most people don't want to sit within those discomfort feelings because they just don't know what's going to come up. What were like the first signs towards your embodiment practices where you're like, oh shit, like I need to do more of this because of what was coming up?
Yeah, I think for me, like, we all have different ways where we abandon the body when things get hard. Like, I'm a massive disassociator. So like, I'll find ways to like numb or just completely leave, and I was realizing that sometimes I was actually going through some big moments or some big shocking things that were happening, and I actually was very numb. I couldn't feel things. And that was really scary to me, because I'm like, I know I should be experiencing something, but because there was such a lack of safety in allowing myself to fully feel everything, I could feel myself just like completely leaving my body and shutting off. And I was like, wow, this is not normal. This is not okay. So it was stuff like that. But then also like really tracing back to like a lot of my eating issues and my challenges around food were because I couldn't hold emotion. So I would use food to numb or to deal with my emotions, to distract, all that kind of stuff. So when I started tracing the patterns of like, where is a lot of my distorted behaviors coming from? And it's like, an inability to sit with things or be with them and actually process it through the body, and finding a way to like not have to do that. So, you would know this from working with women around disordered eating, is that like, when you learn how to feel your feelings and like be in your body and experience life as a body in a way that feels safe and create a lot of safety there, then all those kind of things just kind of take care of themselves. You don't have to put in these strategies and these behaviors, and you don't have to distract yourself all the time. Like, it actually just takes care of itself, because a lot of those disordered eating patterns are there because we can't handle the emotions. So we use food to do it, or we try and change our body so we don't have to feel the feelings of not liking our body. Whereas if you just deal with the feelings, you don't have to change anything. The behavioral stuff takes care of itself. Yeah.
And it's so interesting because too often people will not want to go down that route and feel all the feelings because it's fucking scary. And you know what? It is. However, would you feel all the feelings or continuously suffer for another, 1-2 decades of disordered eating?
Yeah, exactly. Like, every single thing that we do, every behavior that we do that we're not happy with, can be traced back to an emotion that we don't want to feel. So every single thing that we do is driven towards pleasure and away from pain, and more so away from pain than towards pleasure. Like we will try and avoid pain at all costs. So all those yucky emotions. So when I was working with women and also with myself, what I was noticing is like every single time I'm doing something that I know I don't want to fucking do anymore because it's leading me in the wrong direction, it's because there's emotion there that I don't want to feel. So instead of trying to stop doing the behavior, just learn how to feel the emotion. The behavior doesn't exist anymore because the behavior is a strategy to not feel the emotion. So it's kind of like that's why it can take so long for people to try and get where they want to be, because they're trying to work from a behavioral level and trying to fix the behavior. But unless you fix your ability to be able to sit with the emotion that the behavior is helping you avoid, then you're just going to find another behavior to help avoid that emotion. So, and that's like, for me, like when we talk about embodiment, like it's very different for everybody and what that looks like. But for me, it's very much around the emotional level and like being able to experience everything in the body, and create an immense amount of safety with my capacity to be able to process emotions and not leave or not distract or not numb and not pick up my phone and be on social media. That was like a huge part of my embodiment journey, was the emotional level. And so much, almost everything comes back to an emotion. Like all our behaviors are driven by an emotion, every single one of them. Even when we think it's logic, it's not. There is an emotion behind the logic. We just use logic to kind of make sense of it, but it's always an emotional thing, right? So it's like, we need to really start paying so much attention to the emotional level, because that is the driver of absolutely every single behavior.
I can relate to the fact of disassociating and scrolling on social media.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And that's like the worst one, because it feels good in the moment, but then it brings up so much other negative emotions, like the comparisonitis kind of thing. And, you know, like it just gets you in this like dopamine loop where you need more and more and more to be able to get the satisfaction from, you know, just jumping on there. And this is the grossest thing that I realized about social media. And I heard this the other day, is that they've now changed the algorithm to 5 to 7 second videos, like, you know, reels that they're promoting, because that is the sweet spot for dopamine, and it keeps you on the app for longer and longer and longer. So they're actually designing the algorithm to favor content that keeps people on the app and completely disconnected from their lives, because the longer we're on there, obviously the more that we see advertising, and, you know, it's a business thing. So yeah, just having that awareness of, you know, if I find myself mindlessly scrolling, I just have to stop and rewind and say, okay, how have I gotten here? What was the emotion? Was I bored? Was I feeling bad? Was I wanting to like check out something that makes me feel better about myself, you know, or someone that I can judge a little bit or something like that, you know, something that's going to bolster my self-esteem. And yeah, I always kind of have to do a bit of a rewind and be like, okay, how did I get in a scroll hole? What was happening before I picked up my phone? And then deal with that. Yeah, so it's a tough thing to do though.
It's such a smart way of looking at it as well, because honestly, sometimes I would be on social media and I would actually be intentionally going there to look up something or search someone or to chat with someone, but I end up doing something completely different.
Yeah.
On someone else's page looking at certain reels and I'm like, wow, like this is crazy.
Yeah.
You know, it sucks you in.
Yeah, and that's disembodiment, right? It's getting into the mind and out of the present moment and getting lost in the mind. And these are all ways that we do it all day, every day, without even knowing it. And I know that like my mental health is the worst, and I just feel the worst in general when I'm on my phone more. Like it is just the way that it is. When I have less screen time, my mental health is way better. I feel clearer. Also, like I can connect to my own voice more. You know, I'm not being influenced by other noise and what this person's doing or that person's doing, and whether you're conscious of not, you're always taking it on or comparing. And yeah, every time we open up our phone, it's the human brain natural reaction to create comparison, because comparison is how we orient ourselves and how we understand things. So if you're always on your phone, you're especially looking at your colleagues or too much, then it can really affect how you feel about yourself, and also really dilute your own personality, your own message. And yeah, it can be quite dangerous. Like I love supporting the people that I love in the space, but I'm also really mindful of like creating before I consume. So I'm always in creation mode before I'm looking at anyone else's stuff, because I just don't want it to kind of mess with my vibe or anything like that, or get into a comparison loop that makes me feel like not confident enough to say what I really want to say.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that as well, because I've noticed sometimes I'll be in a creating mood and I'll go on Instagram, but then again, it's just like I get way too fucking distracted and I'm looking at everyone else, what they're doing, and then I completely forget about what it is that I was there to create. And then it just, like, disappears and you're like, oh, great. Well, I got nothing now.
Back on the app. Yeah. I know what you mean.
It's crazy. And I wanted to revert to the business side of things in regards to like the comparison and, influencing our friends and other coaches. But before I head down that route, I also want us to continue talking about the embodiment side of things. What role do you think has society put towards women around, the beauty standards in regards to the struggles that they're having around the embodiment and the self-worth side of things?
Yeah. I mean, this is really massive, and without getting like full on crazy feminist mode, patriarchy and just living in a society that is really built around men has, really put us in a position where we're kind of just fighting for our place. And so traditionally, obviously, in patriarchal society, women are more objects and resources for men, and supporting roles for men. And because our grandmothers and our grandmothers and even our mothers, they had no resources, they had no power, they weren't able to vote, they had no money, so they were really there and so vulnerable that they had to be taken care of by a man. And of course they're going to orient themselves around pleasing a man and male beauty standards and the male gaze kind of thing. So this has kind of been handed down from generation to generation. And even though we are in a place now where we have resources, we're working women, we make our own money, this is so old and in our lineage that without even realizing it, we've been indoctrinated with these beliefs and ideals that we have to look a certain way, and it has to look, according to the male kind of sexualized version of us, which is, fertile looking but still thin, like beautiful but not, but natural, whatever it is, it changes with trends. But and then obviously capitalism, which is also a structure much like patriarchy and built around men and the male brain, which is very, capitalism in general is all about opportunistic and making money and, at all costs. Obviously, the beauty industry has latched onto that and has now taken advantage of the fact that we were already born into this. It's challenging, because it's like we are working against a system that is so old and so ingrained, and there's so much money behind it, which is why we have to be really media literate. I think we have to really understand what we're consuming and separate from it and look at it from a disassociated point, not get too bored into it. So we have to educate ourselves around what advertising is doing and, be really mindful of what kind of media we are consuming, because it does kind of program your brain, right? And again, we're always comparing, so that's really important. I also think it's really important to not demonize ourselves for wanting to be beautiful. I actually spoke about this in one of my group programs the other day. Is beauty is like an inherent value of every creature in society. So if you look outside, you look at the plants and the flowers, the most beautiful flowers attract the bees. The peacock attracts, the best mate. There is beauty being displayed in nature at all times because it naturally attracts the eye. There's no denial. And to deny that beauty is not a value of human beings in general is like a denial of reality. So there's a certain degree where we have to go, okay, it's okay to want to be beautiful, but we have to draw that line around what does beauty mean to me, and how am I going to feel beautiful within myself without it becoming at a cost of my other amazing characteristics. Like sometimes when we're over focusing on one thing, we under focus the other amazing parts of our personality or our gifts or our qualities, and we go too far for that. But also, playing into our natural strengths and deciding what beauty means for us, and instead of adhering to a standard that's set by someone outside of us, deciding how we want to show up and be beautiful, and decide how we can find beauty within ourselves and accentuate certain things that are natural to us, as opposed to trying to fit ourselves into like this mold that somebody else has created, which just inevitably makes us feel bad, because when we're trying to be someone we're not, it's a form of self-rejection. So even though you might look like that, or you can do your makeup or diet yourself into a position where, you know, you are fitting that mold, unconsciously you've completely rejected yourself. So it's never going to feel good. Even if you're getting praise from the outside, on the inside, you know that you are so far removed from your natural state that you're aware that you aren't really yourself. And then also you're living with this threat of like, if I lose this, then what? So there is actually a lot of study around body image research that says that the closer that we get to our idealized version of ourselves physically, the more fear we feel around losing it. So we have this idea that we think that we're going to be so happy when we finally get to that perfect body, or we look this perfect way. But what happens is we actually gain a whole lot of fear around what it means if we lose that, if we gain weight again, or if our beauty fades or something happens. So it's not quite what we think it's going to be, which is why this like self-acceptance piece and finding beauty within our natural selves and our most natural, healthy, set, vibrant weight is super important. And that's an embodiment thing, right? Is like finding your body's natural, vibrant, healthy set point, and like creating a lot of comfort there and coming to acceptance with that. Because I think the most beautiful thing, and you would probably agree, in a woman is her vibrancy, her essence, is when she's like embodied, right? And that's a woman who is just at peace. She's inhabiting her physical self. She's not trying to control or trying to perform. She just is. And that you can only gain that type of radiance from coming to that place. You can't fake that. That's it is like a full-on authentic acceptance of me, but I'm also taking care of myself. I'm also looking after my body. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. I feel like that was a very long-winded way to answer it.
No, it's such a good way of looking at it, because as you mentioned such good points, especially around the trends. Too often, you know, we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people, and trends come in and go. But when there's one particular trend, then people will latch onto that trend as long as they can. It's like with dieting, you know, as you mentioned, you need to be the thinnest or smallest version of yourself. And then you hit that goal. And it's just like, okay, well, what now? How can I maintain that for as long as possible? But you can't, because your body changes according to seasons and age and whatever. Yeah. And again, this is why so many women fall into that pattern of binge eating, you know, disordered thinking, body image issues, self-trust, like lack of self-trust, lack of self-worth. And it goes down into like a massive rabbit hole. And it's just like, well, fuck, like, how can you get out of it? But then you're trying to get out of it, but you don't know what your real essence is, because you've been trying to be someone completely different.
Absolutely. And that's when we talk about this low self-worth thing as well, I think a lot of times low self-worth is just complete disconnection from who we really are, you know. So people experience it as low self-worth, but I think it's just that they've lost that real connection to who they are. And if they found it, then they would value themselves, but they don't even know, because they're so busy being externally focused that everything that they do is based off what someone else is doing or what society expects them to do or look like. And then of course you're going to feel like shit, right? Because you abandon yourself, and you're not listening, you're not paying attention, you're not honoring who you really are or what you really look like. So you could do as many things as you like externally, but until you have that strong connection with who you are at your core and your values, your personality, your strengths, your weaknesses, all that kind of stuff, you're always going to feel like crap. So yeah, I often think that low self-worth is just related to like a lack of understanding of the self, and connection to it.
Yeah, definitely. What are some examples that you can, I'm just thinking, like, what are some examples where women have successfully transformed their self-worth journey by overcoming these mistakes?
Yeah. So I think one thing, and I will mention this first, is that so when we talk about worth, the word worth, we're talking about value. We talk about value, we're talking about values. And values are very much determined by environment. So you will feel like you have high worth and high value when you're in an environment that values what you have and who you are. So I think a lot of people find themselves in environments that have a values misalignment with what they naturally bring into the table. And then of course you're going to feel of low value because you're not naturally exhibiting the qualities and the aspects that environment values. So it's going to feel like, oh, I need to change myself to fit in. And I think this happens a lot in the fitness industry. Obviously, there is a certain value around a certain body. So when you're entering into the industry, you may feel lower value because your body doesn't fit into that. So I think there's a big environmental factor. So when I'm working with clients around this, there's a big environmental factor of like, okay, who you are. I get them to really connect to who they are, their essence, their own personal values, and their own personality and their aspirations, their dreams. And then I'm like, okay, put yourself in environments with people who value the same, and then all of a sudden you're going to feel more valued and your inherent worth is going to kind of go up. So it's a lot of it environmental. Like environment is a huge thing. It's really hard to feel good about yourself if you're in an environment that doesn't acknowledge who you are or doesn't value who you are. So I think in a greater sense, like we're in a society that values certain beauty standards. So we're all in that environment, which is why it's like a bit of a systemic thing with women, and the women who adhere to that, feel better. Well, some of them anyway, that's also a bit of a fallacy, but it's like, we really have to find women and circles and people who are on the same level, who see us for who we are. And then we will start to feel that too. So a lot of it obviously starts inside out. We have to acknowledge our own value beyond how we look in order to be able to attract people who are at that same level or vibing with us. But then it's really important because we're such connected creatures, and connection is the number one thing for humans. We will do anything to sustain connection. Literally, that's why we distort our bodies, is because of connection. So if we can seek connections that mirror our internal value, then that's really going to enhance that for us as well. So that's a really huge thing that's often overlooked, is like circle of influence and environments. What else? So I think there's so many different pieces, looking at beliefs, obviously, just looking at emotions. Again, like if you are somebody who has the capacity to deal with negative emotions, you're not going to do so many things to try not to feel negative emotions. So if you can deal with rejection, if you can deal with shame, if you can have those experiences and know that you're going to be okay, you're not going to try and change yourself so much to avoid rejection and shame. You'll just be who you are. And if someone rejects you or someone shames you, you're not so fucked up from it that you're going to, go and starve yourself on a juice cleanse for 4 weeks or whatever it is. So it does come back to that level again, is working with our ability to be able to have experiences that we can hold, so that we don't have to constantly change ourselves to avoid that experience. So there's like so many layers and so many levels. And whenever I'm working with someone around self-worth, it will be a focus on a certain level, maybe more so than others, but there's always like a mental aspect. There's always like a thought and a belief aspect. There's always an emotional aspect to it. And there's an external environmental aspect as well. So, yeah.
I can relate to the environment side of things, because for so many years I was caught up in a really negative, I'd say toxic, even though I can't stand that fucking word, but like just a really shitty place with shitty people. And I just noticed myself once I was able to, move away from it, I just started feeling so much better. And I realized the environment itself wasn't, feeding me correctly, or not correctly, but not feeding me positively to actually feel better at myself. Yeah,
it's huge, isn't it? And that's why I think, in the fitness industry, if you find a group of people, and that's why I think I love the powerlifting kind of little space within the fitness industry. Like I've worked with a couple of clients in the mindset kind of arena who are in the powerlifting space, and I love that community. Like they're very performance focused, which can have it's good and bad parts as well, like hyper focus on winning and all that kind of stuff, but like that's pretty natural in any sport, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I love those communities, or those kind of sub communities within the fitness space that are focused on things that don't have to do with looking a certain way, that you can find people that are really passionate about being very educated, or really passionate about a certain way of training. That's why I loved CrossFit. Terrible for my body. Body is like absolutely screwed. But I loved going in there and seeing mums and, people who were like super fit and then not so fit, and like older guys, younger women, like everyone in together. And it was never about how you look. It was just like rock up, do your best, and like cheer everyone else on. And it was such a healing experience for me, coming from like, more bodybuilding background, to go into those spaces. So finding a community within the larger community, the fitness community, for those coaches out there, is really important. As far as like recognizing your own value and creating community.
This is bringing me so many questions regarding like coaching and business stuff, but I want us to that towards the end because I have some really cool questions for you around the embodiment style of things and the self-worth. And I want to ask you, like, what are some unspoken challenges or difficulties that you faced or even your clients during this path of personal growth and healing?
Yeah. I think there's like this big misconception that it's like a one and done sort of situation. Like you work with a coach once and then you're all healed, or, you know, you think that you deal with something and then it's over. Like it can be layers and layers and layers, and things can arise again and be triggered again. And, you know, I think there's like a big misconception, much like when you work with a trainer, you know, you do a weight loss thing, you lose your weight and then you continue to maintain. It's not like that with internal healing. It's like it can take a longer time, and it can take continual integration and awareness. And then, you know, you can find yourself like having that thing come up again, even years and years later after you thought that you dealt with it. So it's not as complex. I mean, it's not as like linear and simple as I think people like. They just think, oh, I'll just do this program and then I'm healed. And I've had lots of people in my programs who, you know, even though they have an awesome transformation, they'll come back and work with me over something completely different, because it's just like, it's a continual lesson and it never ends. And this is the crazy part about self-awareness, is once you start understanding how to be aware, like you're going to be seeing shit the rest of your life. You know, it's now you're woken up. You're no longer asleep. And I think that's a scary thing. And I think that's the reason why a lot of people never go into this work, and never really truly, again, inhabit the body, or like do their embodiment practices, because once you start feeling everything and once you start seeing everything, you can't shut that off. You're committed now. Well, you can, but it's going to be really, really hard, because you're going to be aware that you're doing that. And then it creates a lot of anxiety. So I think that's a big thing as well. I think a lot of people get trapped in an awareness phase of like seeing everything and learning about stuff, and then they don't know what to do with that. So they don't learn the tools and they don't know how to continue to integrate and continue to embody those learnings. So they get really messed up from having all this awareness with nothing to do with it. And that can actually create more anxiety. But I think another thing as well is how your relationships change and how hard it is, that aspect. Like you will start to no longer connect with people that maybe you've had long-term relationships with or had in your life for a very long time. And that can be really difficult, because it can be quite lonely and isolating for a bit. So when you've kind of, you start to see, especially the dysfunctional relationships, or maybe even not the dysfunctional ones, but the ones that just like once you reach a different level within yourself, you just don't have the same connection, and then everything feels a bit weird. So there can be a bit of an isolation phase where you haven't really met your new soul family yet. And the people that you used to feel very close to, you don't feel as close to now, because you can see how dysfunctional or maybe just not aligned you are. And I think that can be a really, really lonely place. And so a lot of people, because we're so connection focused, will go back and revert back into old ways and old habits, because they're too afraid of leaving things behind. And sitting in that void of like, okay, I don't know who my people are yet, or I don't know how I'm going to feel supported. They find it hard to be in that space. So they kind of revert back before they're able to, you know, open that new door completely. And also something that I did, and I know a lot of people do that, you get like this level of self-righteousness around like your growth, and you start just like wanting everyone around you to change as well, because we don't want to leave our people behind. It's like, okay, well, you need to go heal that, because you've got, you know, child wounds, and like, you know, you're so anxiously attached, and you start to get this little bit of like an ego around like how everyone else needs to change to align with like you, so you feel more comfortable, you know. And I think that can happen too when we're feeling that like separation, or we get like a heap of knowledge and we think that we know a lot. You know, there's this thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and we'll probably touch on this later, where it's like a cognitive bias. And a cognitive bias is like an automatic way of thinking. Our brain goes into an automatic pattern. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is one where it's like we learn a little bit of knowledge and we have this like overestimation of our knowledge. So we have this overconfidence. So I might learn a little bit and I now think I'm an expert, when really we're not, like, when put up against an actual expert, the knowledge is like very, very, very low. But when we learn a little piece of information, it's really common for people to think that they know everything and then they're an authority. And I think that that can happen as well, is like when you start to get a little bit of a spiritual ego around things, or like think that we're a bit better than everyone else and so evolved. And then that will eventually come back and bite you in the bum at some point when you start to see that. So yeah, I think those are some of the things that we don't talk about, is like the loneliness of growth, opening up the floodgates for feeling all the things that you haven't felt before. So when you start to connect to your body fully, you're now connecting to every emotion that you've suppressed, and that can be a really overwhelming experience. And also just awareness and seeing things clearly means that you can't have the excuse of ignorance anymore, and you have to take a fucking shitload of responsibility for your life. You can't play dumb. You can't be like, everyone else is at fault, it's not me. You can't do the victim anymore, because you start learning about that and you're like, oh God, that's me. So yeah, it's like with the awareness comes a whole lot of personal responsibility. And I think some people maybe unconsciously know that, which is why they avoid, or once that hits, they're like, oh, this is too much. I liked playing victim. I liked it when everything was not my fault. And so yeah, it's but having said that, I'm making it sound like it's a terrible idea to like grow into personal development, but it's not, because like with everything, the greater the responsibility, also the greater the joy that you get out of it. So the more that you take on and the more aware that you become and the more you work on yourself, yes, there are challenges now that you never had, and they can feel really heavy because you can't turn your blind eye to them, but you also get to experience like a whole new level of like connection to yourself, connection to life, joy, your relationships improve, like everything amplifies the good and the bad. So you're no longer living in this sort of numb state, completely shut off. It's like you're opening yourself up to the extremes of the bad, the extremes of the good. I shouldn't say bad, challenging. Extremes of the challenging, but the extremes of like the opposite end of that, which is all the love and the joy and the connection and the growth and all that kind of good stuff.
It's so funny that you mentioned the fact of the challenging times that come up and how like we want to disassociate ourselves from it, or even play the victim, because too often, things will pop up in life and you'd start, well, I don't know about you, but like I would start blaming other things, situations, people, and I would actually have to like sit back and be like, no, like I'm the one to blame. I need to take this self-responsibility. And too often people who don't have that enough awareness still play that victim mentality where they're blaming everything and everyone. Like, this is too expensive. That is not good enough. The weather's shit. I missed the train. Like, whatever the excuse is, it's just like you need to start taking self-responsibility for yourself. Pardon me. And I also believe that's also the leading pathway to learning a little bit more about ourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it's, that's the hardest thing, is like I realize that I say sorry a lot these days, way more than I used to. And it's not because I'm fucking up more, it's because I'm like really aware of when I'm fucking up now, and I'm no longer like putting it on someone else or telling myself a story about how it's not my fault, because I don't want to sit with the feeling of being at fault or being wrong or bad or whatever the story was. So yeah, it's it's a very humbling experience, but I mean, at the end of the day, you become a better person. You're no longer afraid of making mistakes, because again, you're not afraid of the feeling of making a mistake, because you've learned to deal with that.
It's so true. I feel as if you've already answered the next question that I have to say, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How can facing the uncomfortable truths be a catalyst for the personal growth or the healing journey?
Yeah, I guess like we can only really deal in the realm of reality, right? So it's like change only happens there. And it's like that's the only reality that we have the power to make proper change in. And I think when we convince ourselves otherwise, and we're telling a story about how it's not our fault, we're deflecting and projecting and all this kind of, we can't actually make any change. Nothing's ever going to change. So when we look at reality and see things clearly, then that's when we have a real possibility to go, okay, so I'm in charge now. I can take 50% of my 50% of this situation, whatever it be. It might be more than that, but at least 50%. Every single thing we have a certain level of responsibility in. When you do that, now you're in control, right? So when you actually claim that you are responsible, now you also are responsible for making change. When you're constantly going, oh, it's this fault or this fault, and you're powerless, because then you can't change it, right? So it's like, yes, it's painful to take responsibility, but you're also now in the driver's seat, so you get to change it as well. So it's a double-edged sword. You get to control it. Yeah.
And that leads me to us being able to control the way we coach our clients. And for those who are coaches and listening to today's episode, it's understanding the difference of you actually offering coaching services that align with you, or are you just putting programs out there because every fucking Bob and Joe is doing the same thing? And I would love to know, what does it mean to you maintaining integrity when you're offering your business services to clients?
Yeah. And I think, you and I have chatted about this before, and this is something that I've really sat with the last year, taking a critical look at like what's been going on in the industry, and just like, it's exploded. The coaching industry is like, gone wild. I think it's specifically around the COVID era. We all went online. A lot of people lost their jobs, became coaches, so there was a lot of people out there, and we're all fighting for the same space essentially. And, I really saw this big difference, and a few things that were making me really uncomfortable. And so I was really had to sit with my own, I guess, feelings around how I was going to operate and show up in this space. And I think for me, like the number one thing I think is really important, having a level of experience and embodiment is really important. So have I actually worked through this myself? Do I have the authority to be able to be, to be able to talk about this and also empathize with my client? That's so important, but that is not enough to be able to coach someone, right? Personal experience doesn't make you an expert. So just because you have gone through something yourself, it gives you a bit more of an authority and empathy, but it does not give you the ability to coach somebody around that. Like if you are in a great relationship, that doesn't mean that you can be a relationship coach. I'm sorry, it doesn't. There are so many different deeper layers to that. That if you like healed your own journey with food, great. That's a great story to be able to add. But if you don't know how to help somebody else with their nuanced, situation, with their challenges, with all these different background things that are not actually related to you, if you don't know how to coach around that, then you're not actually qualified to do that. And I think that's what was one thing that I was like really confronted with, was people just pivoting and moving into areas and expanding because they wanted to release programs over and over and over again, new things, new offers all the time, because that's like this like hyper focus on overproduction and overconsumption at the moment. Like it's just wild, like how many people are releasing program after program after program, and using personal experience as the only thing that they're drawing upon in order to release. And I'm like, that's important, but it doesn't actually give you the authority or the ability to be able to help someone else through their thing. Because when you are educated or qualified in a certain area, you've gone through a process where somebody outside of you has made sure that your knowledge is well-rounded, that you're able to look at things from a nuanced point of view, that you're able to ask the right questions, and you know enough about that topic and the mechanisms behind why that person has that challenge beyond your own specific experience, the very different aspects that contribute to certain challenges. Like unless you know all that, then you're only just coaching through your own lens, and you're just fitting everyone into that lens, and that's just not doing them justice. I think for me, integrity is like, do I have enough experience personally where I can say, okay, I've moved through this to the degree that I feel confident enough coaching, and within myself, I know that I'm able to lead because I am enough along in this journey to be able to hold that position. But do I have someone outside of myself who has edified that and can say, yeah, okay, she's been through a process of, whether it be a proper course where there is tests involved or you have to submit something. It's like a course and a program are very different things. So taking another coach's program doesn't give you the education as it would taking a course through a third party and a certified course provider. It's very different. So I think that for me was like a bit of like a one that I was like, oh, there's a lot of like gray area happening, and then a lot of money being charged by people who are like in that gray area as well. So I really had, and that's just me personally, like obviously whatever anyone wants to do is on them, and they, can go through their own processes. But for me, I'm like, I think it's to maintain integrity within the industry at large. It is about making sure that we are operating from the highest level of integrity within ourselves. And that's, am I educated and qualified, like legitimately, not Dunning-Kruger styles, I've got a little bit of information, now I'm an expert and I'm going to coach everybody. Like, is it legitimate? And like, can I honestly sit with it and be like, yes, I can talk about this because I have moved through it and I have embodied and integrated this for long enough to know that it's stuck and I know what I'm talking about. And yeah.
It's such a what's the word I'm looking for? I feel very passionate about it as well, and I know you do too. And it makes so much sense with everything that's happened over the last few years, this gush of like saturation of coaches in the industry and not knowing what to do and who to go to. But again, as you mentioned, it's having that self-awareness of like who you're taking information and help from as well.
Yeah. And it's like, as a coach, if we're looking to work with someone and doing our due diligence, I can never say that properly. Due diligence. When it comes to who we're working with and asking the right questions. And I think like, not being afraid to ask what someone's experience and background is in this particular area, and be really aware of like people who are able to give you tangible outcomes, or like things that they can deliver or work with you in, like what capacity, and asking for previous client results or testimonials, like doing your research to just like, and that's fine to do that. And anyone who has an aversion to doing that, to providing that information, is probably someone who doesn't have that information to give you, because anyone who is really legit and really like actually experienced and embodied will have all of that stuff, and they'll be more than happy to provide you with whatever detail and information that you need to feel safe making a purchase and working with them. I think people who are purely marketing from an aspirational point of view and using lifestyle stuff, and particularly like income claim marketing, which is something that that I have a bit of like an aversion to. I just don't think it's a legitimate way to prove that somebody's actually really good. Just ask loads of questions, and anyone who doesn't want to provide you with at least some ideas around what outcomes that you can get from working with them, I would be a little bit hesitant of that, or I was just like curious as to why.
Definitely. I want us to discuss a little bit more about the importance of transparency in business offerings and pricing as well.
Yeah. What specifically would you like to ask around the importance of?
Well, let's discuss like what in your belief and definition, like what would you say is the important side of things of being transparent in your offerings and pricing? Because too often people will be like, charge whatever you feel, and it's just like, okay, I'm gonna charge $1 million. It's just like, that's not really realistic.
I think that kind of stuff has been it's gotten so distorted, and I feel like there is a bit of a difference between the business coaching space and the women who are operating in that space, and the people and the operators who are working with like general population people, like your PTs, your online coaches who are doing nutrition and training and all that kind of stuff. Because in that space, in the business coaching space, because they're just cycling money through each other, through other coaches, and coaches are more likely to spend just a shitload of money on other coaching, there is like no cap. And I think that they've really capitalized off like what can be made when there is like this like charge what you're worth kind of idea, which doesn't make any sense. There is no other market in this entire world who has that model. It's kind of wild. If you take that and talk to people in the outside world, like my housemate has an MBA. She's a very, very intelligent woman, works very high up and for Amazon. And I kind of was telling her about this pricing structure, and she just was laughing. She was like, it's actually insane. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But in this industry and in that space, it's kind of become quite normal. But if you're someone who is working with people, they don't have fluid income. Generally speaking, they're on a salary, so they can only dedicate this certain amount. So you can't charge what you're worth to that audience. Well, first of all, we're all worth infinite amount of money, so that doesn't make sense whatsoever. We're all worth $1 billion because we are all infinitely worthy. So worth should be, in my eyes, based off experience, qualifications, all the kind of stuff that in the outside world people would be. If you're going to go for a job, your salary is going to be based on how long you've been in the industry, how skilled you are, your results, what you've proved, like any kind of education that you had. That's kind of like where your salary would be met. And for some reason, the coaching industry has created this idea that like that stuff doesn't make sense here, and we're not going to take that on, which has worked out really well for a lot of people. But if you're somebody who's working with a coach who is in that space, but you're working with people who have a fixed income, you can't transfer that. So you're going to be paying a lot more than what you can charge. And then I think that can create a lot of pressure, and that can put people in a position, it puts them under a lot of financial pressure if you're paying a lot to a business coach. And then you can't pass that down, those kind of high prices down to your people, because at some point people are just gonna be like, I can't afford that, or this person's doing exactly the same thing but like half the price. So being mindful of, you know, who your market is and what they can reasonably pay for your services, and kind of detaching from a world that you're not actually operating in. You want to operate in that world, you can play that game for sure, but if that's not where you're at, then having some discernment around how much am I charging this person, what's reasonable in regards to what I can bring in order to pay them, plus pay myself, and, you know, live the life that I want, not getting trapped into this, like, I guess like a magical thinking kind of mindset of like anything is possible, which I'm not saying like it isn't. I don't like to sound like I'm shitting on people's dreams, but realistically, you know, you have to either have a lot of clients, which is, you know, you're going to have like some really big marketing kind of systems happening to bring in a lot of new people, especially with, you know, the social media has changed a lot, or you're going to have to charge a lot of money. And there is a limit on what like your general population person is going to be willing to pay, because there's plenty out there who, you know, will be charging less. That makes sense. So yeah, I think it's really important to price, when you're looking at pricing your own services, like what feels nourishing, like what feels like it's going to be nourishing for you as an energy exchange. Like you're not going to feel resentful because you're undercharging, and you're not charging from a place of fear, or I'm not worthy, or I just need everyone to buy, or I'm too scared, like a scarcity thing, but also not getting into this like delusional state of like, I can charge more than a surgeon would get paid for, you know, going to medical school for like 10 years and saving lives. Like you have to kind of be realistic about it, and also like grounded. And if you want a sustainable business, like sustainable, then you have to sit somewhere like that, right? Like not under, not over, because if you do either of these things, it's just not going to work out for you long term. And that's a sad thing. So yeah, not getting caught up in that, and just being true to yourself, what feels good, what the people that you want to work with will reasonably be able to afford. Obviously, you know, you want them to feel a little bit stretched, so they're bought in. But yeah, you also don't want to put yourself in a position where you've priced yourself out of the market because you know, you've taken on a belief from a system that you're not really operating in, which doesn't really have many rules at all, you know. Yeah, I hope I've said that correctly, or language that in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it definitely makes sense to me, because it's something that, again, like we've spoken about this privately, and we've also seen this within the industry, that as coaches ourselves, we're happy to invest more into our education and coaching, and, you know, have mentors. And as you said, a lot of the gem pop people, either they don't have those funds, or they just don't see it as they're not seeing it as a bigger investment as us coaches. Like we're seeing it through different lenses. And like you said, they want to feel stretched, but not stretched too much that it's going to put so much financial pressure on them.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to look at like, how am I going like realistically make the amount of money that I need to make in order to pay this person that I'm passing it on? And there's absolutely no reason that, you know, obviously people who are really experienced in the industry, who are further along, they're going to charge a lot more, because you're not just paying for their time, you're paying for all the education that they have, all the experience that they have that have led them to have that level of understanding. But there is a certain degree where that you're not going to be able to bring in the same amount, especially the coaches in that area who are making like a lot. Like it's because they're charging a lot as well, like their prices are very high, and that you're not going to be able to realistically. And again, this might be, it's not really a limiting belief, I'm just talking the realm of reality here. Again, remember, we can only control what's real, and once we have a real understanding of what's possible, you're not really going to be able to hand those that down to the degree that they're able to within that space. Yeah, and it puts a lot of pressure on. It puts a lot of pressure on to make a lot of money. So yeah.
It's so interesting, and I'm wondering what will happen in the next year or two, or even like 5 years, the industry itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot, and I think, like, honest opinion is I don't think it's sustainable the way that things are going. I think that like when things hit a bubble, then a bubble will eventually burst, and like everything, things go in cycles as well, and things aren't just going to keep going up in these trajectories and going to continue to go. I think those who, like I said, remain in integrity have always been service based, like focused more on the client than on themselves, or at least equally. I'm here to serve just as much as I am here to serve myself. I think those people, if you can continue to remain in your heart space and from that, the reason you got into it. And I know a lot of us, we didn't get into it for the money, it was like a lot of us, I hope that's not the case for most. We got in this to help people. So if you can stay in that space, and from that place and operate from your heart, then you're going to be able to last the distance. I think people who have, maybe tried to take advantage a little bit too much, that's not going to last, because it never does, right? It never does when people are doing like quick cash grabs, all that kind of stuff. So I think if you have a good product and you're a great coach and you continue to invest in your development, as a coach, and be able to offer more, then your value is going to continue to rise up. So I think pricing should be based on like what you can reasonably offer as far as a transformation and proof of that, and what you can provide for that person, not just like based off what you want to earn.
And that's how you stay within integrity as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's where not a lot, but like many coaches are going the different way. They're thinking more dollar signs instead of actually wanting to make a positive impact and give clients value.
Absolutely. And look, I feel like it's kind of natural. And I think we all have to realize that we're humans. I know for me, like there was this one period where I got all caught up in that too. I'm like, oh my God, I could be making like, 100 grand months, all this kind of shit. And I got really caught up in that fantasy. And that was kind of the time when I really started, like, things started getting a bit icky and wonky, was when my focus shifted towards like, how do I make more money in my business, as opposed to how can I make more money but also provide more value. So I just wanted to make more money without having to like provide more value. I was just purely focused on that. And I think that's when things started to feel a bit off. That's when I could tell my integrity was getting wobbly. It's just, as far as sustainability and having a good brand and people having a great experience, like you have to be able to actually offer something for that, for what you're charging. And I think if you're constantly thinking about how can I become more valuable first and foremost, then that's all you need to worry about, because the value exchange will then match your value. But if you're just worried about bringing in more money without becoming a better coach or educating yourself more, then why should somebody pay you more money if you're just the same, or you're no better than this other person who is, we shouldn't say better, no more valuable in regards to like your education and experience than somebody else who is charging like a little bit less. Yeah,
I completely agree with that. Speaking of value, how can our audience get more value from you?
Oh, more value from me. I think Instagram is obviously the place to find me these days. I'm kind of taking a little bit of a break in regards to group programs up until the start of next year, but also one-on-one I've pulled back on a little bit while I'm working on some other stuff behind the scenes, which has been awesome as well. People want to connect with me, they can connect with me by Instagram. My tag is I am Ashleigh Boehm. I'm sure you'll include it in all the little bits. So I work with lots of coaches, definitely in the fitness industry, across many different industries, very much from a like personal development space, also like a coaching skill development space, but then we also do like a little bit of back end business stuff. I wouldn't call myself a business coach at all by any stretch of the imagination. I only talk to the points in the spaces that I'm really comfortable in coaching around. Just a lot of like personal and professional development stuff, but also work with just women in general who are wanting to experience life through their body, love themselves a little bit more, well, not a little bit more, a lot more, and live within their values. So through Instagram is the best way to get me, and feel free to shoot me a DM and say hi. Always love to have a little bit of a chat. Open to that.
Love a good chat.
Love a good chat always.
We do indeed. Well, girls, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy and let us know what you thought with a little bit of feedback. As Ash said, slide into our DMs and let us know if you got, if anything resonated and what value you got from today's podcast. And then until next time, make sure you work from integrity and start loving yourself a little bit more.
Absolutely.